At its peak, it was estimated to be killing 212,000 infants every single year. That isn't a casualty figure from a war zone, a famine, or a pandemic. That is the statistical excess mortality linked to a single business strategy deployed in the 1970s. We aren't talking about defective airbags or a bad batch of spinach. We are talking about a marketing machine so precise, so psychologically devastating, that economists at the National Bureau of Economic Research later calculated it caused a 27% spike in infant death rates in the developing world. The company behind it wasn't a shadowy arms dealer. It was the friendly Swiss giant that makes your chocolate bars and your morning coffee. This is the story of Nestlé. But if you think this is just a history lesson about baby formula, you are missing the point entirely. This is a masterclass in how multinational corporations weaponize biology, privatize resources, and create double standards that allow them to sell poison in one hemisphere while selling health in the other. Today, we are opening the dossier on the empire of food. To understand the crime, you first have to understand the scale of the suspect. Nestlé is not just a food company. It is a nation-state disguised as a grocery supplier. With revenues that eclipse the GDP of many of the countries it operates in, it controls a supply chain that touches almost every human need: water, nutrition, pet care, and medicine. For decades, they have operated under a Swiss banner of neutrality and quality. But beneath the corporate polish lies a relentless mechanism designed to extract profit from the most vulnerable demographics on Earth: new mothers in poverty and communities running out of water. We are going to deconstruct their playbook, chapter by chapter. We will look at the milk nurses of the 1970s, the water privatization wars of the 2000s, and the sugar scandals exploding across Africa and India right now in 2025. The tactics haven't changed, only the PR has. Let's go back to the scene of the original crime, the Global South, the 1960s and 70s. Picture a maternity ward in Lagos or Manila or Kingston. These are nations in transition, moving from agrarian life to the chaos of urbanization. For a young mother in these cities, life is precarious. Then she sees a woman enter the ward. This woman is dressed in a crisp white uniform, looking exactly like a nurse. She projects authority, hygiene, and modern science. She approaches the mother with a smile and a gift, a free tin of high-tech Western baby formula. She explains that in the modern world, this is how the wealthy feed their children. It's cleaner, it's better, it's scientific. The mother, wanting the absolute best for her child, accepts the gift. She doesn't know that the woman isn't a nurse at all. She is a sales representative on commission. And that free tin isn't a gift. It's a biological trap. Here is the brilliance and the evil of the mechanism. It relies on a quirk of human biology called the lactation gap. When a mother stops breastfeeding to use a bottle, her body stops producing the hormone prolactin. If she exclusively bottle feeds for just a few days, coincidentally, the exact amount of time a free sample lasts, her own milk supply dries up. Relactation is incredibly difficult, often impossible. By the time the free tin is empty, the mother physically cannot breastfeed anymore. She is now trapped. She must buy the product, or her baby starves. In finance, we call this a lock-in effect, like buying a printer that only takes specific expensive ink. But in this case, the printer is a human child, and the ink costs 30 to 40% of the family's daily wage. Nestlé didn't just market a competitor to breast milk. They engineered a situation where the competition was physically eliminated. Before we look at the horrifying math of what happened next, pause for a second. Most people look at a scandal like this and see bad ethics. you need to look closer and see incentive structures. The sales reps were incentivized on volume. The executives were incentivized on market penetration in emerging economies. If you want to understand how money actually moves the world, from the boardroom to the maternity ward, you need to be subscribed to this channel. We dissect the machinery, not just the headlines. Join the few who actually understand the game. Now, let's look at what happens when you mix this aggressive sales tactic with an infrastructure that wasn't ready for it. The lock-in was successful, but the economics were fatal. Because the formula was so expensive relative to local wages, mothers began to stretch the supply. They would dilute the powder, mixing it with 2 or 3 times the recommended water to make it last longer. A baby receiving watered-down formula is slowly starving to death, but they don't look emaciated immediately. They bloat. It's called kwashiorkor. Even worse was the water itself. In many of these communities, access to clean water was non-existent. Breast milk is sterile and carries antibodies. Formula mixed with contaminated river or well water is a bacterial bomb. Diarrhea sets in. Dehydration follows. The child's body, already weakened by malnutrition from the over-diluted formula, cannot fight off the infection. The result was a cycle of sickness and death that doctors termed bottle illness. The company knew the economic reality of their customers. They sold the product anyway. By the mid-1970s, the graves were filling up, and the world was starting to notice. But corporate giants don't just roll over when caught, they counterattack. In 1974, a report titled The Baby Killer was published by the NGO War on Want. Nestlé's response wasn't an apology, it was a lawsuit. They sued the publisher for libel in a Swiss court. It was a tactical error. The trial became a global spectacle, airing the company's dirty laundry for the press. Church groups, usually the most conservative of investors, began stripping their endowments of Nestlé stock. A massive consumer boycott launched in the US and Europe. This wasn't just a PR crisis, it was becoming an existential threat to their brand equity. The courtroom drama revealed internal memos and sales manuals that proved the medicalization of marketing was company policy, not rogue employees. The pressure cooker exploded in 1981 at the World Health Assembly. The goal was to create a global law, the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. The code is specific. It bans advertising formula to the public. It bans free samples. It bans the milk nurses. It bans gifts to health workers. It seems comprehensive. But here is the loophole that Nestlé and others exploited for the next 40 years. The WHO code is a recommendation, not a treaty. It only has teeth if individual nations pass it into domestic law. And guess who has a massive lobbying budget to ensure those domestic laws are watered down? In many countries, the code was adopted voluntarily, or with massive exceptions for informational marketing. The industry agreed to stop the most flagrant abuses, like the uniformed nurses, but they simply moved the budget elsewhere. This leads us to the era of technical compliance. Nestlé created massive internal audit departments. They produced glossy reports showing they were 100% compliant with their own interpretation of the rules. But independent audits told a different story. In Pakistan, whistleblowers and NGOs found that instead of giving samples to mothers, reps were giving educational gifts to doctors. Instead of billboards, they funded medical conferences in luxury resorts for pediatricians. The mechanism of influence shifted from the front door of the maternity ward to the back office of the hospital administration. If you control the doctor, you don't need to dress up as a nurse. The doctor does the selling for you. The result? The market share kept growing. and the breastfeeding rates in the developing world struggled to recover. But while the formula wars were turning into a bureaucratic trench battle, Nestlé was already looking for the next commodity to monopolize. They realized that selling the powder was good business, but selling the water you mix it with? That was the future. Formula is a niche product for infants. Water is a necessity for every living human. And in the early 2000s, one man would say the quiet part out loud, sparking a new global hatred for the brand. His name was Peter Brabeck-Letmathe, and his philosophy on water would become the most memeable corporate villain monologue in history. The year is 2005. Peter Brabeck, the CEO and later chairman of Nestlé, is sitting for a documentary interview. He is calm, Austrian, intellectual. He isn't shouting. He is philosophizing. He leans into the camera and discusses the concept of water. He describes the view that water is a human right as extreme. He argues that water is a foodstuff, a commodity that should have a market value. The internet exploded. The clip was shared millions of times. It fit the narrative perfectly. The evil empire wants to own the rain. Now, to be fair, and we must be fair to be accurate, Nestlé has spent millions trying to clarify this statement. They argue he meant that drinking water is a right, but filling your swimming pool isn't. But the damage was done because the philosophy aligned with their actions on the ground. The scandal wasn't just what Brabeck said, it was what Nestlé was doing in places like Pakistan, California, and Ontario. The mechanism here is regulatory arbitrage. Nestlé locates aquifers in rural areas where water laws are outdated or weak. They purchase land or permits for nominal fees, sometimes paying just a few $100s a year for millions of litres of water. They pump the groundwater, bottle it in plastic, and sell it back to the public at a markup that rivals the drug trade. In communities like Wellington County, Ontario, or drought-stricken California, locals watched their water tables drop while Nestlé trucks rolled out 24/7. It's a privatization of the commons. They take a public resource, add zero value to the liquid itself, merely packaging it, and sell it as a premium good. When activists cry, "Water is a human right," they aren't talking about swimming pools. They are talking about the fact that a corporation is draining the community well to sell it back to them in a bottle. The friction point is always the same: local scarcity versus global export. In Pati Dilwan, Pakistan, villagers alleged that the deep wells dug for Nestlé's Pure Life factory were lowering the water table so drastically that their own local wells were running dry or turning sludge-filled. The irony was bitter. The villagers couldn't drink their own tap water anymore, so they had to buy Nestlé Pure Life, bottled from the ground beneath their feet. This isn't just capitalism, it's a feudal extraction model. The backlash eventually led to constitutional changes in places like Slovenia and huge protests in North America. But for Nestlé, the bottled water division remains a cornerstone of the empire. It proved that if you control the brand and the distribution, you can literally sell people something that used to be free. You might think, okay, that was the 2000s. Surely, in the ESG era of the 2020s, with sustainability reports and conscious capitalism, they have cleaned up their act. You would be wrong. The empire didn't stop exploiting the global south. They just changed the ingredient. They moved from water to the most addictive substance on the planet: sugar. And this brings us to the scandal breaking right now in 2024 and 2025, involving the innocent-sounding baby cereal, Cerelac. In 2024, the Swiss NGO Public Eye sent samples of Nestlé baby food from around the world to a laboratory in Belgium. The results were damning. They found a systemic double standard. If you buy Cerelac baby cereal in Germany or the UK, it contains 0 added sugar. It is compliant with WHO guidelines that say babies under 2 should not eat added sugars to prevent obesity and tooth decay. But if you buy the exact same brand in Ethiopia, Thailand, or South Africa, the lab found it packed with sugar, up to 6 grams per serving. That is more than a sugar cube in a single bowl of mush for a 6-month-old baby. This isn't an accident. This isn't a manufacturing error. This is a formulation choice. They removed the sugar for the protected, regulated European babies, and they pumped it into the products for the developing world. Why do this? Sugar is cheap, yes, but that's not the main reason. The mechanism is palate training. Pediatric nutritionists know that the first 2 years of life determine a human's taste preferences. If you hook a baby on high sugar foods at 6 months, you are physiologically wiring their brain to crave processed, sweet foods for the rest of their life. You are creating a future customer for Nestlé's Kit Kats, Nesquik, and sugary cereals. It is a long-term investment in addiction. The WHO calls this a major driver of the double burden of malnutrition and obesity in Africa. These countries are struggling with undernourished kids and an explosion of childhood diabetes. Nestlé's defense? They claim they are customizing for local tastes. But babies don't have local tastes. Babies eat what you give them. The local taste is a fiction created to justify a cheaper, more addictive filler ingredient. Fast forward to the 2025 Public Eye Report. After the initial scandal broke in India, Nestlé scrambled. They rapidly reformulated products in the Indian market to reduce sugar, proving they could do it if the political heat was high enough. But in Africa? The 2025 data showed that Cerelac products in Kenya and other markets still contained up to 7.5 grams of sugar per serving. 19 civil society organisations across Africa signed an open letter demanding an end to this culinary apartheid. Nestlé's response was a masterclass in corporate speak. We are working on it. They set a target for the end of 2025 to remove added sugars globally. But that means, for another year, millions of infants are being fed a product that doctors agree is harmful, simply because the regulatory bodies in those countries are weaker than the European Union. The geopolitical consequence of this is massive. We are talking about the human capital of entire continents. When you have a generation raised on substandard nutrition, first the formula crisis, now the sugar crisis, you stunt physical growth and cognitive development. You burden the healthcare systems of developing nations with preventable chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease. Nestlé extracts the profits to Switzerland, and the global south keeps the medical bill. This is why the WHO and the UN frame this not just as a consumer issue, but as a human rights issue. It is a transfer of wealth and health from the poor to the shareholders. But the scariest part isn't the sugar in the tin, it's the algorithm on your phone. The battleground has shifted. The 2022 WHO report highlighted a new frontier: digital marketing. Nestlé and its competitors are no longer just relying on sales reps. They are using data mining to target pregnant women on social media. They use baby clubs and mummy influencers to push formula subtly. The milk nurse of 1974 is now an AI chatbot offering parenting advice, sponsored by a formula brand. They use emotional triggers, fear of the baby not sleeping, fear of not having enough milk, to push the product at 3 a.m. when the mother is exhausted and scrolling her phone. The code bans advertising, but does it ban a sponsored post in a private Facebook group? The laws are analogue, but the predation is digital. Walk down the baby aisle today. You see dozens of cans. Gentle, sensitive, soy, nighttime, toddler milk. It looks like scientific customization. In reality, most of these distinctions are marketing fiction. The concept of toddler milk, or growing up milk, was invented specifically to bypass the WHO code. The code bans advertising infant formula 0 to 12 months. So, companies invented Stage 3 milk for toddlers. They package it to look exactly like the infant formula. Same logo, same bear, same colours. They advertise the toddler milk on TV. The parent sees the ad, recognises the branding, and buys the infant formula. It's called cross-branding. It is a deliberate legal loophole to advertise a banned product by proxy. And despite decades of promises to stop, it is still the industry standard. We have to ask, why does this keep happening? Why, 50 years after the first boycott, are we reading the same headlines about the same company? The answer lies in the fiduciary duty. Nestlé is a publicly traded company. Its legal obligation is to maximise shareholder value. The markets in the West are saturated. Birth rates are falling. To grow, they must dominate the emerging markets of Africa and Asia. And to dominate those markets, they must displace traditional food systems. The incentives are structurally aligned against public health. Unless the penalty for breaking the rules exceeds the profit from breaking them, the behaviour will never change. A $10 million fine is just a line item on the marketing budget of a $90 billion company. So, is Nestlé the evil empire? That's too simple. Nestlé is a machine. A machine designed to convert raw materials, water, milk, sugar, into wealth. It doesn't have a conscience. It has a board of directors. It doesn't have morals. It has compliance officers. When we demonise them as evil, we pretend that they are an anomaly. They are not. They are the perfection of the current corporate operating system. They push until they hit a wall. In the 70s, the wall was a boycott. In the 2000s, it was the water activists. In 2025, it is the sugar investigators. The tragedy is that every time they hit a wall, they don't stop. They just find a new liquid to monetize. The story of Nestlé is not over. As water becomes scarcer due to climate change, the company that controls the aquifers will be more powerful than many governments. As food systems become more processed, the company that holds the patents on the flavour profiles will control the diet of the world. They are currently pivoting into medical nutrition, blurring the line between food and pharmaceuticals even further. The playbook they perfected in the maternity wards of the 1970s is being adapted for the geriatric wards of the 2030s. They hooked the babies. Now they are coming for the ageing population with the same promise. Science in a can is better than nature. Don't think for a second that this is just about one Swiss company. This mechanism, privatizing the commons, creating dependency, and exploiting regulatory gaps, is the blueprint for the entire global food system. If you want to survive the economic realities of the next decade, you need to understand who owns your supply chain. We are going to continue tracking these giants. We have a dossier on BlackRock and the housing market coming up that makes the baby formula scandal look like a warm-up act. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications on. You cannot afford to be naive about who is feeding you. Class dismissed.